Hello everyone, Ronald here, the Viking Home Companion, with another story from the good old days. And in this case, the emphasis is certainly on old in good old days, because I'm going back quite a ways. There's at least one or two elements of this story that have shown up in another good old days story, but I'm stringing it all together for the one specific event where these all happened. So this takes place, I believe, in late 1982. I will let you do the math to figure out how long ago that was. I don't need to be reminded. But it takes place in Napa County, the Shire of Vinhold at the time. Didn't become a barony until 1984. And it took place at the Boy Scout camp up at Lake Berryessa. And this was a great location for the SCA to hold some of our events at, especially wartime events. And it had a great open field area for field battles. It had a great area for forest or woods battles. It was forested, but it was also overgrown with Scotch broom. Scotch broom which can reach 6-7 feet tall. And so you ended up with trails through the Scotch broom underneath all the various types of trees. So it was an absolute blast to go fighting in that area. And then of course we're at a lake. So once the fighting's over, you can just strip down, jump in the lake, clean up a little bit, and cool off. So whenever we could, we tried to use it. Even if it did mean that we had to deal with the occasional rattlesnake. And yeah, we actually did have to deal with the occasional rattlesnake. It turns out that real swords, not rattan ones, are still quite useful in the SCA for some things. But at any rate, at this particular one, I hadn't been in the SCA very long. Basic just a bit over a year, I would think, at that point. And I didn't have a lot of my own armor. All of the fighting that I had been doing had been either in the bits and pieces I had made and then borrowing whatever I needed from the loaner gear. But the one thing in particular that I needed that was a little in short supply was a helm. We had a number of Freon can helms in the Shire. There were only 2 helms in the whole group that were medievalish looking. One was Joffrey Griffenhold's helmet, who eventually was knighted, and I became his first squire. The other one belonged to Anthony the Sinister, who became the first Baron of Vinhold. And at this particular war, I wasn't able to borrow a helm, so I went as a combat archer, Javelineer. And what I took up there to use, archery-wise, was a crossbow. Now this crossbow was made by a gentleman known as Regulus the Wanderer, and it was made out of a 2x4 for the stock, turned on its flat side, and then he had milled and carved around it, and then he'd actually put a wheel lock in it. It was not a notch bow, it actually had a functional wheel lock. The only problem with the wheel lock, though, was that it was really slow to reload. So you had a rate of fire issue. For the lens, he had just taken a normal 30-pound fiberglass bow and tied it to the front with cord, and it had a groove to set the arrow in, and you used a normal 28-inch arrow. So it wasn't any different than using a hand bow, except that it was on a stock. But of course, a lot of people do have a tendency to initially have a response to a crossbow as, oh my god, it's a crossbow, which came in handy at this particular event, so I will get to that. So anyway, we start the day, and I stayed with the unit as much as I could, although I did, of course, go out sniping. That happened quite often with the combat archers. And when you're fighting in a long-term resurrection battle, you do tend to have the units kind of break up a bit, and you will occasionally end up on your own, whether it's from coming back from being resurrected or the rest of your unit got killed. So I walked around, I did some sniping, and I had a little bit of fun over at the castle. There was a permanent picnic area that had been built. It had a concrete platform with picnic tables and a permanent wooden canopy up over it. And we just lined around the outside of it with hay bales, and it made a really great castle. So I was on the outside of the castle. If you're facing the castle, I was off on the left. Came up that way, took a shot with the crossbow, hit somebody, and then somebody yelled, "Crossbow!" and the entire castle ducked. Everyone. Down below the hay bale walls. So that was pretty amusing in and of itself. So I reloaded my crossbow, and next to me was a tree stump, 2.5, 3 feet tall. So I stepped up on that, and that allowed me to see past the wall closest to me, see the further wall where people were crouched down, and I shot one of them. So about half of the people on the far side scooted over to the near side to me. The others turned around, still crouched, and put their shields up so I couldn't shoot them. And I heard someone inside the castle yell, "Archers, get that guy!" And then there was this pause. "What do you mean we don't have any archers?" And I just kind of laughed out loud. That was so funny. And as I was starting to try to reload the crossbow, thinking, well, I don't know if I'm going to get anybody, but at least I can take a couple more shots while they're all crouched in there, fish in a barrel type situation. Well, one of the guys inside was wearing full plate armor, so he came out through the gate, came over to chase me off. Now, you have to understand the difference in combat archery back then versus how combat archery is now, okay? Huge difference. First difference is back then, we were using wooden shafted arrows with 3/4 inch bird blunts on the front. And then you would take a strip of strapping tape, fiber tape, and you would run it lengthwise down the shaft. And that way, if it broke, it wouldn't become a jagged, pointed edge that could hurt somebody. And everybody had to have a screen over the face of their helmet. Lots and lots of grumbles and bitching and moaning about that over the years. But at any rate, that was the weaponry for the archer. And armor, completely different animal than now, okay? Back then, first of all, you were never allowed to hit an archer. If you got within 15 feet or weapons length, you could tell them they were dead and they had to take it, okay? And all they were wearing was padding. You would wear elbow pads, knee pads, groin protection, throat protection. Generally speaking, you should wear some kind of body armor, but it wasn't required. But you still had to wear kidney protection in case you got shot in the back by another archer or hit with a javelin from a javelineer. And then you wore a fencing mask, and you had to have some kind of a hood over the back of your head to protect it in case you got shot in the back of the head with an arrow or a javelin. And I had borrowed a fencing mask because I didn't have one of those either. But luckily my well, I should say not my former knight because he wasn't a knight at the time, but Joffrey was a fencing instructor at the local community college, so he had fencing helmets. So I borrowed one of his, was wearing that, and I had a leather coif that I had made while in high school. High school actually had a leather class, and I was in that. So my making leather armor dates all the way back in where I was 17 years old. So I had the leather hood on, I put the fencing mask on, and I was good to go. So this guy in plate armor comes out to run me off, and I turn around and take off. And back then, I was in actually pretty good shape. And all of a sudden, I hear this runaway freight train behind me. And believe it or not, that guy in the full plate armor managed to run me down. And I turned around to look at him and said, "How did you do that?" And he just collapsed on the ground. And he was huffing and puffing and gasping for air. And I said, "Never mind, I figured it out." And while he was laying there, one of the guys from my side just came over and said, "You're dead." So it wasn't really worth the effort to run me down the way he did. So a little bit later on, I go back to the res point. I collect some more arrows and come back out. And I shoot for a while. And I had run out of arrows, and I was getting ready to head back over to the res point. Even though I wasn't dead, that's where the collection point was for arrows and javelins. And as I start to head over that way, 3 guys from Sinagua start to chase me. And I turn around and I'm taking off, and these guys aren't catching up to me the way that other guy did. But I don't have any arrows, but I whip around with the crossbow, and I go, yah! And all 3 of them try to stop so fast that they fall down. And as they're on the ground, rolling over to get up, some of my guys come over and go, you're dead, you're dead, you're dead. So I scared 3 guys to death with an unloaded crossbow. Remember what I had said about crossbows having kind of a stigma attached to them. There was just something about a crossbow that really gets people going. So I get there with the crossbow, and I go back to the res point. So later on, though, I'm kind of tired of using the crossbow because of the slow rate of fire. It's just gotten to be too much of a pain in the butt to turn the wheel lock into the right position, lock it up with the trigger handle. So I decided to come out and just do javelineering. And so I grab up 4 javelins, which is about as much as I can carry. Now, SCA javelins, if you're not familiar with the SCA, they're made out of PVC piping, and then they have a padded end on them. And you chuck them. So they're throwing spears. We just call them javelins. At any rate, I'm having a pretty good time, and I'm running around, and I'm doing all sorts of different things. And run back, collect more javelins, run back out, run over, collect more javelins, run back out. Now the thing is, you got to remember that at this time period, I'm 18 years old and stupid. I was not drinking much in the way of water. I didn't eat much throughout pretty much any of the day. I had a decent breakfast, but that was it. I didn't snack on anything at all. But the biggest issue, of course, was not drinking anything. No water, no Gatorade. I'm just running. And it's hot. I mean, we're talking, late summer, early fall, California, up in the hills. So there's a fight going on between Sinagua and the Mists behind the castle. And I run over there. I've got 2 javelins at this point, and I chuck both of them. I managed to kill 1 guy with them. I turn around, I run back, I grab a couple more javelins, because that's all that was available. Grab 2 more, run back over, throw 1, kill a guy. And all of this exertion, running around in the heat and not drinking any water, catches up to me. And I start to pass out. And I'm getting this tunnel vision effect coming in, and I've got this 1 javelin up ready to throw as I'm going black, and all I see in front of me is somebody's back, and I chuck it, and boom, I'm out of it. I have no idea at the time if I had hit the guy or not. I just threw it. So I wake up a little bit later in the Kyrgyz's sunshade. Kyrgyzs being medics, doctors, whatever you want to call them. They were our first aid people. When we were still allowed to have first aid people that could treat you at least for minor things. So I'm laying down there. I'm being treated for dehydration, possible heat stroke, or heat exhaustion. So they've got moist towels and wash rags all over me, and they've been getting me to sip and drink water and Gatorade, and checking my vitals to make sure nothing else is going on. And I'm laying there, my glasses are off, and I've got wash rag, cold wash rag on my face. And then I hear someone say, over here, he's in here. And I take off the wash rag and I put my glasses on and I look up. And standing there looking down at me is Prince Ronald Wilmot of the Mists. My own prince. And I look up at him, and he says, I'm the one you hit in the back with the javelin. Remember what I said, this is my own prince, my own side, and I hit him in the back with that javelin, took him right out. And I go, I'm really terribly sorry, Your Highness. And he says, you realize I'm going to want a poem or something about this. And I go, yes, Your Highness. Well, you know what? I never did get a poem or song done, and it's been 40-something years later. So I hope, Your Highness, actually at this point you're not a highness, you are a duke and a knight, that this at least, my acknowledgement of my stupidity, will suffice. If not, I guess I'll have to get back to work on doing that poem. At any rate, that's another story from the good old days. Ya sure, you betcha.